there is a particular tragedy reserved for those born into abundance. You see, the poor understand danger. They navigate it daily, developing instincts that privilege never requires. But the wealthy grow up in a different country entirely, one where problems are solved by telephone calls, where unpleasantness is managed by staff, and where the sharp edges of American life have been carefully padded by generations of accumulated power. Now, the heiresses who populate these stories trusted in that padding. They'd been taught since childhood that their names meant something, that their families could fix anything, that the world would arrange itself around their comfort, because it always had. When violence came for them, sudden, senseless or slow and calculating, they faced it without the armour that harder lives might have provided. Some survived to tell their stories. Others exist now only in court transcripts and yellowed newspaper clippings, their final hours reconstructed by strangers. Today, we demonstrate how all of them learned the same terrible lesson, that crime, unlike society, does not check the guest list before it enters. When you inherit a fortune at age 3, everyone around you suddenly develops an opinion about what's best for you, who you should marry, where you should live, how you should spend the money they wish was theirs. By the time you're old enough to make your own decisions, you've already learned that genuine affection and calculated interest often wear identical faces, speak in the same reassuring tones, and claim to want only your happiness. Sunny von Bülow discovered this truth in the most devastating way possible, learning too late that the European aristocrat she'd married came with a very specific timeline in mind, one where her continued existence had become inconvenient to his plans. What makes her story particularly chilling isn't the wealth or the Newport mansions or the society scandal that would captivate America, but rather the slow realization that the person sleeping beside you might be counting down the days until you're no longer an obstacle. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we investigate how a railway heiress worth $75 million became the victim in America's first televised murder trial, revealing why sometimes the greatest danger to extraordinary wealth isn't theft or bankruptcy, but the people who've learned that inheritance beats divorce in the financial mathematics of marriage. Private railway carriage hurtling between Virginia and New York became the unlikely delivery room for Martha Sharp Crawford on September 1st, 1932, privilege literally in motion from the moment she drew breath. George Washington Crawford had built his fortune on fossil fuels, commanding Columbia Gas and Electric, while oil and natural gas gushed from his Pennsylvania properties like black gold geysers. 3 years after Sunny's unusual arrival, Crawford departed permanently, leaving his toddler daughter $100 million, $2 billion in current value, along with an emotional void no trust fund could fill. The motherless heiress split her childhood between Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park and the Tamerlane estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, ferried between palaces by a Rolls-Royce and driver who knew her moods better than any parent. Beauty came as naturally to Sunny as wealth. Vogue crowned her among the world's best-dressed women, while observers drew the inevitable Grace Kelly comparisons that followed her like expensive perfume. Depression stalked her through finishing school hallways and debutante balls, a shadow presence that champagne and shopping sprees could temporarily blur but never banish. A Swiss ski resort in 1957 provided the setting for Sunny's introduction to Prince Alfred Eduard Friedrich Vincenz Martin Maria von Auersperg, a tennis instructor whose lineage vastly exceeded his bank balance. The Austrian prince traced his bloodline to medieval nobility, but the collapse of the Habsburg Empire had reduced him to trading on his backhand and title with American heiresses seeking European validation. July 1957 saw Martha Crawford transformed into Princess von Auersperg, adding 2 children to the nobility's ranks, Princess Annie-Laurie Alla and Prince Alexander Georg. Prince Alfred's commitment to monogamy proved as unstable as his finances. Affairs proliferated like unpaid bills, including a particularly public dalliance with Italian actress Gina Lollobrigida. By 1965, Sunny had endured enough continental infidelity, securing an amicable divorce that left her with the children and him with whatever remained of his reputation. Enter Claus Cecil Borberg at a Manhattan dinner party, a Danish charlatan who'd crafted himself a new identity as meticulously as any forger working in basement light. Copenhagen birthed him on August 11th, 1926, to playwright Sven Borberg, whose Nazi collaboration earned 4 years in prison after the Allies sorted through the wreckage. The son escaped to Britain during wartime, appropriating his maternal grandfather's surname, Bülow, then illegally tacking on von, aristocratic garnish for his invented persona. Working for J. Paul Getty by the 60s, Claus occupied that nebulous space between secretary and confidant, close enough to power to absorb its mannerisms without wielding any himself. June 6, 1966 brought another marriage for Sunny, this time with prenuptial terms that would prove prophetic. Divorce meant Claus received nothing, but her death would deliver $14 million. Newport's Clarendon Court became their primary stage. 21 rooms of Georgian grandeur previously featured in high society. The Grace Kelly film that seemed to follow Sunny everywhere. Daughter Cosima arrived in 1967, completing their surface perfection, while Claus began calculating how long he'd need to maintain the marriage charade. Alexandra Isles changed the equation, a Dark Shadows actress who'd portrayed the Gothic soap opera's original Victoria Winters and understood dramatic timing. By 1979, she'd issued her ultimatum, 6 months for Claus to divorce Sunny and marry her, or their affair would end like a cancelled series. December 27th, 1979, dawned with Sunny von Bülow unconscious in her Newport bedroom, while her husband calmly read newspapers downstairs, insisting she merely needed sleep. The previous evening's eggnog had mixed poorly with Sunny's hypoglycemia, a condition making alcohol as dangerous as poison, yet she'd consumed several glasses at the family Christmas party. Alexander von Auersperg had helped his stumbling mother to bed, attributing her uncoordination to holiday excess rather than the first act of attempted murder. 9:30 the next morning brought Maria Schrahlhammer racing upstairs, the German maid's 23 years of service preparing her for many things, but not the death rattle emanating from her employer's throat. Sunny lay grey and gasping, her body rejecting consciousness, while Claus rejected Maria's frantic pleas to summon medical help immediately. 9 hours passed. 9 hours of Sunny's brain starving for glucose, before Claus finally allowed doctors to intervene in what he insisted was merely alcoholic stupor. Newport Hospital's tests revealed the smoking gun, blood sugar dangerously low, but insulin levels at 214, nearly double the lethal threshold that would kill a non-diabetic. Intravenous dextrose sparked Sunny back to life, though her blood sugar paradoxically dropped further, a reaction occurring only when massive insulin doses circulate through the system. She awakened with zero memory of the incident, but Maria filed every detail in her mind's evidence locker, particularly Claus's inexplicable delay and casual demeanour during the crisis. February 1980 brought Maria's most disturbing discovery while organising closets in the Manhattan apartment. A black leather bag hidden among Claus's belongings, like a serial killer's trophy case. Inside lay glass vials, prescription bottles, syringes, and most alarmingly, a container clearly marked insulin, medication for a disease Sunny had never been diagnosed with. The maid shared her discovery with Alexander and Isla, the three forming an unlikely detective agency monitoring the bag's movements between Newport and New York. April delivered another medical crisis, Sunny hospitalised again with hypoglycemic symptoms, though doctors found no explanation beyond her known blood sugar condition. Alexandra Iles's deadline ticked closer, 6 months transforming into 3, then 2, pressure mounting like a syringe plunger, pressing poison into veins. December 21st, 1980 arrived with grim symmetry, another Christmas gathering at Clarendon Court, where Sunny displayed familiar symptoms: confusion, poor coordination, slurred speech. Family members guided her to bed again, but morning brought no recovery. Only Sunny sprawled across cold marble bathroom tiles in irreversible coma. Tests confirmed what the family already suspected: astronomical insulin levels inconsistent with any natural medical condition, consistent only with injection. The second attempt had succeeded where the first failed. Sunny's brain too damaged from prolonged hypoglycemia to ever emerge from the vegetative state. Maria confronted the reality that her 9-hour vigil the previous year had merely delayed the inevitable, that Klaus had simply refined his technique for the second attempt. Alexander and Alla hired former New York County District Attorney Richard Koo, whose $400,000 investigation would transform family suspicions into criminal charges. The black bag's contents would be tested, witnesses interviewed, and a narrative constructed that painted Klaus as a methodical would-be murderer who viewed his wife as an obstacle to wealth and remarriage. America's first televised murder trial opened February 2, 1982 in Newport Superior Court, transforming Rhode Island into ground zero for a scandal mixing insulin with inheritance. Crowds assembled before dawn, seeking the 80 available seats, treating the proceedings like Broadway theatre, featuring real blood and actual billionaires. Prosecutor Stephen Famiglietti outlined a simple narrative. Klaus von Bülow had twice attempted to murder his wife using insulin injections, motivated by $14 million and a mistress's ultimatum. Maria Schrollhammer commanded the witness stand, a greying German maid whose accented testimony about finding Madame near death, while Mr. von Bülow refused to call doctors, proved devastating. She described the black bag discovery with precision, each detail: the insulin vial, the syringes, the inexplicable presence of diabetic medication for a non-diabetic woman, building the prosecution's case. Alexandra Isles followed with soap opera timing, revealing how Klaus had confessed to watching Sunny slip deeper into the first coma before finally summoning help. The actress confirmed their affair and her marriage ultimatum, providing the motive that transformed medical mystery into attempted murder. Harvard's Dr. George Cahill testified with 90% certainty that insulin caused the second coma, while Dr. Robert Bradley pushed further, 100% certainty on the first incident. Defense attorney Harold Price Faringer painted Sunny as self-destructive, an alcoholic pill popper whose comas resulted from her own excesses rather than her husband's plotting. Celebrity depositions from Truman Capote and Joanne Carson claimed intravenous drug use was commonplace in the von Bülow household, though gossip carried less weight than medical evidence. The syringe from Klaus's bag tested positive for insulin at its tip, physical evidence that seemed to corroborate Maria's testimony and the medical experts' conclusions. 6 days of deliberation produced the verdict on March 16th. Guilty on both counts of assault with intent to murder, each word falling like a judge's gavel in the packed courtroom. Judge Thomas Needham imposed consecutive sentences, 10 years for the first attempt, 20 for the second, though Klaus remained free on bail pending appeal. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz took the case, assembling law students like a legal SWAT team to dismantle the conviction through procedural warfare. The appeal brief exposed fundamental flaws. Sunny's family had seized the black bag legally, but prosecutors analysing its contents without a warrant violated Fourth Amendment protections. Investigator Richard Koo's notes had been withheld from the defence, potentially concealing exculpatory evidence that might have changed the trial's outcome. April 27, 1984 brought vindication. The Rhode Island Supreme Court reversed both convictions in a 61-page decision ordering a complete retrial. The state would get another chance to prove Klaus's guilt, but this time he'd be defended by Thomas Puccio, the former federal prosecutor who'd sent corrupt congressmen to prison. Evidence would be restricted, witnesses cross-examined differently, and medical testimony challenged by experts who'd found alarming flaws in the insulin testing. The second trial would either confirm Klaus von Bülow as a calculated killer or expose the first verdict as a catastrophic rush to judgment based on flawed science and family vendetta. Providence Superior Court hosted the retrial beginning April 25, 1985, with Thomas Puccio dismantling the prosecution's case like a surgeon reversing another doctor's botched operation. 8 distinguished medical experts testified for the defense. Cornell's neurology chairman, the former US Toxicology Association president, forensic specialists who'd discovered the insulin tests were fundamentally compromised. British researchers had found that barbiturates and Valium could trigger false positive insulin results. Puccio's team confirmed this by submitting blind samples that tested positive, despite containing no insulin. The syringe evidence crumbled under scrutiny. Insulin encrusted on the needle's tip, rather than its base, defied physics, since penetrating skin would wipe the tip clean like a squeegee. Amobarbital traces on the needle should have left telltale bruising on Sunny's body, yet examining physicians found 0 injection marks during their careful inspection. 3 weeks before her final coma, Sunny had been hospitalized after consuming 73 aspirin tablets, a suicide attempt that reframed her medical history entirely. Puccio savaged the prosecution witnesses. Maria became a biased servant, protecting her fairy tale princess from the shadowy interloper, while Alexandra Isles delivered just another melodramatic performance. June 10, 1985, brought acquittal on both counts after 14 hours of deliberation, the courtroom erupting in applause, while one spectator collapsed from emotional overload. Klaus emerged victorious but hardly vindicated. Alexander and Ayla immediately filed a $56 million civil suit, determined to achieve through money what criminal law couldn't deliver. December 1987 settlement terms read like an exile treaty. Klaus would divorce his comatose wife, abandon all inheritance claims, maintain perpetual silence about the case, and leave America forever. His daughter Cosima, who'd supported him throughout both trials, regained her place in her grandmother's $100 million will, loyalty's expensive reward. London became Claus's final refuge, a small Knightsbridge flat replacing Newport mansions, while he reinvented himself as a theatre critic, attending opening nights instead of trials. This was a tragedy satisfying all Aristotle's definitions, he'd tell rare interviewers. Everyone is wounded, some fatally. His only public commentary on the affair. Sunny existed in medical purgatory for 28 years at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, fed through tubes, while fresh flowers and family photographs decorated her unchanging room. December 6, 2008 finally ended her mechanical existence. Nearly 3 decades after that bathroom floor collapse, her body surrendering what her brain had abandoned long ago. Alan Dershowitz's book became an Oscar-winning film starring Jeremy Irons, art transforming tragedy into entertainment, while the real participants remained forever altered. Alexander and Ayla channeled their trauma into advocacy, establishing victims' rights organisations and coma research foundations bearing their mother's name. Klaus survived until May 25, 2019, dying at 92 in the London flat where he'd spent 3 decades of court-ordered silence. The question that riveted America, did he or didn't he, accompanied him to the grave, though Dershowitz himself had grown nearly certain of his client's innocence. Sunny von Bülow's story remains high society's darkest fairy tale. A princess who pricked her finger on a syringe and slept for 28 years while the world argued whether her prince had wielded the needle or merely watched her fall. There's a particular vulnerability that comes with being a parent to adult children who've never been financially independent, not because they lack ability, but because your generosity has made independence unnecessary and therefore undesirable. When you provide €500,000 monthly to each child, you're not just supporting their lifestyle, but creating a dependency so complete that your continued existence becomes the only thing standing between them and financial reality they've never had to face. Hélène Pasteur spent decades being Monaco's most generous mother, funding every venture and covering every expense for children who'd inherited her empire, but not the hunger that built it, creating relationships where love and financial desperation became impossible to separate. What she couldn't have anticipated was that her generosity would attract someone who recognized that monthly allowances create perfect leverage, marry the dependent daughter, live off her money for decades, then discover that the grandmother controlling the purse strings has become the only obstacle between you and inheritance. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we expose how Monaco's second wealthiest woman was murdered by someone who'd spent 28 years at family dinners calculating exactly when maternal generosity would become more valuable dead than alive, proving that sometimes the price of supporting your children is paid by becoming expendable to those who've attached themselves to your fortune. (1880). Penniless Italian stonemason Giovanni Battista Pasteur stumbled into Monaco with hands destroyed by mine work and ambitions that would spawn an empire worth 20 billion euros. The orphan from Buggio had already spent his childhood underground, extracting minerals since age 13, learning that fortune favoured those who grabbed it by the throat. Monaco's Saint-Charles Church needed builders. Pasteur, rechristening himself Jean-Baptiste in French fashion, laid stones for wages that barely covered bread, each block a step toward transformation. Years passed in back-breaking labour, but Pasteur possessed vision beyond his station, saving every franc while studying Monaco's geography like a general surveying battlefields. 1920 saw him establish J.B. Pasteur and Fils, but the pivot came in 1936. Prince Louis II needed someone to build Monaco's first football stadium. Pasteur won the contract. That stadium's silhouette became his company's permanent logo, branded on every building that would follow. A monument to the moment poverty became power. Post-World War II, Monaco presented opportunities invisible to ordinary men. While others saw barren eastern seafront wasteland, Jean-Baptiste recognized the Larvotto district's potential. He bought beachfront parcels for nothing when there was nothing to the east of the Monte Carlo casino, betting that millionaires would eventually crave Mediterranean views. Each purchase expanded his holdings along what would become Monaco's golden coastline, transforming worthless sand into the Principality's most coveted addresses. Son Gildo inherited more than a construction company. He possessed his father's predatory vision for exploiting Monaco's transformation into Europe's money-laundering jewellery box. 1966 changed everything. Prince Rainier, riding high on Grace Kelly glamour and tax haven status, authorised Gildo to build high-rise apartments along the coast. This single permission slip from the palace created a real estate revolution, allowing vertical expansion in a nation constrained by geography and French borders. The Pasteur doctrine took shape: build luxury towers, never sell, collect rent forever, let compound interest and property appreciation work their dark magic. Formula One champions, arms dealers and oligarchs would write monthly checks to the Pasteur empire for generations, trapped by Monaco's limited geography and unlimited demand. The portfolio exploded, 4,000 properties minimum, perhaps 4,500, worth between 12 and 20 billion euros, effectively one-third of Monaco's total real estate. By the 1990s, the Pasteurs controlled more of Monaco than anyone except the ruling family itself. Their influence measured in concrete and monthly revenues. Gildo's daughter Hélène, born 1937, represented the third generation of Pasteur dominance, inheriting the premium assets when her father died in 1990. Her empire encompassed Le Baia, Emily Palace, the Trocadero, Continental, Le Schuylkill Apartments, and the Gildo Pasteur Centre, $3.7 billion, concentrated in 6 square miles. Monaco nicknamed her La Vice-Princesse, the Vice Princess, acknowledging the Pasteurs as the Principality's shadow royalty, second only to the Grimaldis themselves. Yet Hélène cultivated eccentricities that humanized her billions. She drove through Monte Carlo in a London taxi, preferring its boxy anonymity to chauffeur-driven Bentleys. 2 children consumed her attention. Sylvia, born 1961 from marriage to a Pole named Ratkowski, and Gildo Palanca Pastor, born 1967, with dentist Claude Palanca. Each child received monthly allowances of €500,000, 6 million annually, enough to purchase whatever they desired, except independence from mother's purse strings. This financial arrangement would prove fatal, creating dependency that attracted predators who saw opportunity in Hélène's maternal generosity. The pastor name decorated 15% of Monaco's residential buildings, a vertical empire built by 3 generations of calculated greed and architectural ambition. Giovanni Battista's ghost must have smiled watching his great-grandchildren collect rent from billionaires, his mining-scarred hands having built Monaco's modern skeleton. Then came 1986, a charity ball where daughter Sylvia encountered a Polish charmer whose fraudulent credentials would eventually paint the pastor empire's walls with blood. Wojciech Janowski materialized at Monaco's 1986 charity ball, wearing bespoke suits and lies, tailored just as carefully by expert hands. Warsaw birthed him August 15, 1949, equipping him with communist-era survival skills: forge documents, fabricate histories, monetize proximity to power. His father, Sven Borberg, earned distinction as a Nazi collaborator, convicted and imprisoned after World War II. Legacy of deception passed to the son. The resume glittered with false gems: Cambridge University graduate, hotel magnate, casino operator, nanotechnology pioneer through Firmus Sam, Poland's honorary consul to Monaco. He'd co-founded Monaco Against Autism, earned France's National Order of Merit from President Nicolas Sarkozy. Genuine honours built atop fraudulent foundations. Sylvia Pastor, nursing divorce wounds at 53, avoided the dance floor that night until Janowski appointed himself her permanent companion, deploying charm like a sniper. History repeated itself, he'd later muse, noting how Sylvia's mother once eloped with Sylvia's father, a Polish man, before the family retrieved her, romantic precedent for his infiltration. 28 years together. 1 daughter. Millions upon millions siphoned from Sylvia's accounts into Janowski's elaborate theatrical production of non-existent success. Cambridge never knew him. Pascal Doriac, the personal trainer who'd eventually coordinate murder, had purchased that diploma from a Thai degree mill. Hudson Oil existed primarily in Janowski's imagination and self-authored Wikipedia entries. Reality: one defunct Polish refinery called Glimar, purchased for $40 million never paid. Court orders chased phantom payments while Hudson Oil's website died and its headquarters transformed into a therapist's office, fitting metaphor for Janowski's delusional empire. The company owed its first instalment by the end of 2014, pressure mounting as Janowski's web of lies began fraying at every edge. Dubai became his financial laundromat. Sylvia's money entered, emerged cleansed, then vanished into ventures that existed solely on letterhead and cocktail party conversations. The only money he ever had was his wife's money, Gildo's lawyer would observe, summarising decades of parasitic attachment to the pastor fortune. 2012 yacht purchase, Janowski doctored invoices, adding €1 million to the price. Sylvia paid. He pocketed the difference with practised nonchalance. London apartment for their daughter, the money-bought property in Janowski's name, secretly mortgaged before Sylvia noticed her gift had been stolen and leveraged. Dental school tuition became another profit centre. Actual cost, €250,000 annually. Janowski's claim, $500,000. Pure mathematics of theft. 16 months before murder, 7.5 million of Sylvia's €9 million vanished into Janowski's financial quicksand, irretrievable as smoke. Investors adored Sylvia, he'd admit during trial. Whenever there was a problem, she'd call her friends and they'd sort it out. Parasitism perfected. His Polish consul title, unpaid, ceremonial, worthless, opened Monaco's doors through perceived prestige rather than actual power, fool's gold that fooled everyone. 2012 brought disaster. Sylvia's cancer diagnosis threatened the host-parasite relationship that sustained Janowski's entire fictional existence. Simple equation tormented him. If Sylvia died before Helene, the monthly 500,000 euros disappeared. His debts would devour him within weeks. Pascal Doriac testified that immediately after Sylvia's diagnosis, Janowski first mentioned eliminating the old woman, murder as financial planning. Helene allegedly tortured Sylvia psychologically daily, Janowski claimed, though prosecutors recognized this as posthumous character assassination designed to justify matricide. The relationship between mother and daughter had always been complex, but Janowski weaponized these tensions, presenting himself as Sylvia's protector against maternal cruelty. Hudson Oil's collapse accelerated. Creditors mobilized. Criminal prosecution loomed. Every direction led to exposure, bankruptcy, and the end of Janowski's Monaco masquerade. Helene Pastor, 77 and healthy, controlled the solution to every problem. Her death would unlock Sylvia's inheritance and save Janowski from his self-created catastrophe. 7 p.m., May 6, 2014. Helene Pastor completed her daily ritual at L'Arche Hospital, kissing her stroke-afflicted son Gildo before departing. Mohammed Darwich waited beside the black Lancia Voyager, 20 years of faithful service about to end in shotgun smoke and blood splatter. The chauffeur had become more than an employee. He was Helene's trusted companion, a member of the extended family who'd driven her through 2 decades of Monaco life. The Lancia nosed toward traffic when sudden movement erupted. A figure sprinting from behind concrete barriers, sawn-off shotgun rising toward tinted glass. First blast shattered the passenger window. Buckshot invaded Helene's jaw, neck, chest, abdomen. Over 50 pellets perforating Monaco's second wealthiest woman. The gunman leaned through the destroyed window, firing again. Darwich caught the second load. Face, neck, stomach, chest transformed into a geography of wounds. 20 meters forward, the Lancia crashed, its momentum finally exhausted. Dr. Eric Croix, smoking nearby, rushed toward gunfire echoes and found Helene pulseless. "I thought she was dead," Croix later testified, describing the horrific scene of Monaco's property queen slumped in her seat, chest riddled with shot. One witness described raw terror. "I saw the gunman turn back towards me with his big gun and a bag. I thought he was coming for me." Surveillance cameras captured criminal incompetence, assassins arriving via taxi after failing to purchase a scooter, then escaping in another cab like tourists. 500 euros for the return taxi to Marseille, an absurd sum that immediately flagged the transaction. "They did everything you're not supposed to do," police marvelled. Amateur hour continued at their Nice hotel, the Azur Riviera near the railroad station. DNA on a shower gel bottle, cell phone records creating digital breadcrumbs, financial transfers any investigator could follow. A maid wearing gloves had appropriated the shower gel bottle and delivered it to police, providing the DNA evidence that would help convict the killers. Samin Said Ahmed, 24. Alher Hamadi, 31. Comoros Island natives with Marseille addresses and criminal histories, hired guns who'd never graduated from street crime. They lived in Marseille's rough northern districts, men whose poverty made them susceptible to Janowski's money, desperate enough to attempt murder for 30,000 euros each. 4 days later, Mohammed Darwich died. Collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong employer. His only crime, driving Monaco's marked woman. May 16th brought miracle. Helene conscious, speaking through her tracheotomy tube about a black man appear who fired 2 shots, the first on her, the second on Mohammed Darwich. Police presented photographs. Helene studied them carefully before whispering, "I'm scared. I want to see you again because I have other things to say." Those crucial words never came. May 21st, Hélène Pastor died, taking her secrets and suspicions into Monaco's most expensive grave. Prince Albert issued platitudes, deep support for the Pastor family. Black funeral ribbons decorated corporate signs. Monaco reeled from its first assassination in memory. Investigators initially suspected Italian syndicates, 'Ndrangheta, Camorra, or Russian mafia expansion into Riviera real estate. The Pastor empire made an obvious target. Financial forensics revealed different story. 9 Dubai account withdrawals between April 22nd and May 4th. 200,000 euros systematically extracted. June 23rd brought thunder. 23 arrests across France, including Sylvia Pastor and her Polish partner, the grieving daughter and her Cambridge-educated consort. Pascal Doriac cracked immediately. The personal trainer had no stomach for murder charges, spilling every detail of Janowski's recruitment and payment schedule. The conspiracy extended from the splendours of Monaco to the slums of Marseille, as prosecutors described it, connecting billionaires' row to housing project hitmen. The money trail led through Dubai back to Janowski, while the killer's incompetence created evidence museums, DNA, phones, witnesses, surveillance footage, taxi receipts. Janowski had scripted everything: kill both targets, steal Hélène's handbag to simulate robbery, create chaos to mask the most intimate betrayal imaginable. September 17, 2018. Wojciech Janowski entered the Aix-en-Provence courtroom, radiating the same false confidence that had sustained decades of deception. 4 years had passed since the murders, 4 years of maintaining innocence, while evidence accumulated like snowdrifts against his elaborate denials. "Show me the proof," he demanded, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, maintaining that police brutality and language barriers had produced false confessions, performance art in the dock. He claimed investigators had done everything to me but tear out my fingernails, painting himself as victim rather than orchestrator of matricide. Prosecutors obliged his demand, screening his 2014 interrogation video. Calm questioning, clear French, Janowski stating, "Yes, madame." I asked Doriac if he could resolve the problem with my mother-in-law. The footage destroyed his torture claims, polite exchange, no coercion, perfect comprehension. Janowski's own words convicted him more thoroughly than any prosecutor could. Pascal Doriac proved unbreakable. 140,000 euros from Janowski. Specific instructions: kill both victims, steal the handbag, make it look random. The trainer had kept 50,000, paid killers 30,000 each, followed orders precisely. A fitness coach transformed into murder broker by Janowski's money. Doriac testified about bonuses: 20,000 euros if Darwich died, 20,000 more if they stole Hélène's handbag, incentivizing thoroughness in murder. Sylvia Ratkowski-Pastor endured 3 hours describing her life's destruction, the tsunami that had obliterated everything, recounting Janowski's explanation. He said to me, "This is to save you." She described their final meeting before his arrest. "I was exceedingly angry. He told me he was the one who commissioned it." Gildo Palanca Pastor attended every day, certain of his brother-in-law's guilt. She died without knowing that the devil was sitting at our table. Weeks passed. Denials accumulated. Evidence mounted. Then, October 16th, verdict eve, tears finally breached Janowski's composure for the first time. Eric Dupont-Moretti rose, delivering theatrical surprise. Wojciech Janowski is guilty of having ordered the assassination of Hélène Pastor. These words which you wanted to hear from him come from my mouth. He tried to say these words. He wanted to say them, but he couldn't. Love, not greed, motivated his client, the lawyer argued. Protecting Sylvia from her monstrous mother justified murder, apparently. Prosecutor Pierre Cortez eviscerated this fiction. It was with the money of his companion, that is to say with the victim's money, that Wojciech Janowski paid the killers. It doesn't get more ignominious. Financial records proved everything: collapsed businesses, hemorrhaged millions, looming prosecutions, murder as the final solution to self-inflicted problems. October 17th, life sentences for Janowski, Ahmed and Hamadi. 30 years for Doriak. The jury rejected love, saw only greed. "This is an exemplary sentence," pronounced Gildo. The jury didn't fall for his final manipulation, his last-minute confession. Appeals brought fresh delusions. Janowski accused Gildo of masterminding matricide, prompting his lawyer Gérard Baudoux to pronounce him simply despicable. "You are despicable," Baudoux pointed at Janowski in court, disgusted by the attempt to blame the victim's son for her murder. Intercepted letters exposed Janowski's cynicism. "I am innocent. My lawyers have decided to say that I am guilty, but only in part. Strategic confession as manipulation." November 12th, 2021. Appeal rejected after 7 hours of deliberation. Life sentence confirmed. 72 years old, Janowski would die in prison for his avarice. Poland had already stripped his honorary consul title in June 2014, the Foreign Ministry citing loss of the irreproachable reputation that is essential for this role. The Pastor empire endures. Buildings still dominate Monaco's skyline, rents flow eternally, but the family lies shattered, like Helene's car window. Sylvia lost mother, partner, brother and peace. Gildo survived his stroke, but not his suspicions. The dynasty fractured beyond repair. Monaco's shadow princess died without knowing her daughter's lover had orchestrated everything. 28 years of family dinners concealing murder plans. Giovanni Battista, Pastor's ghost, watches his empire continue, while his great-great-grandson rots in French prison, from Italian stonework to life sentence in 4 generations. The Polish prince who promised salvation instead delivered damnation, trading Sylvia's love for bullets that killed the golden goose he'd been plucking for almost 3 decades. Most people don't get to choose between being remembered for their generosity or becoming a cautionary tale about elder abuse. Brooke Astor somehow managed to achieve both simultaneously, creating a legacy so contradictory it seems impossible. On one side sits the woman who gave away the equivalent of over $1 billion in today's money, personally visiting every homeless shelter and community centre she funded, transforming American philanthropy through hands-on involvement rather than distant check-writing. On the other side sits the same woman spending her final years in conditions so degrading that when they became public, New York society reacted with the kind of horror usually reserved for discovering medieval torture chambers operating in penthouse apartments. The distance between these two versions of the same life raises questions about what wealth actually protects you from once you can no longer protect yourself, and whether being generous to strangers offers any insurance against cruelty from those legally entitled to control your fate. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we trace how the woman who saved countless New York institutions couldn't save herself from becoming a prisoner in her own Park Avenue apartment, revealing why her story represents every elderly person's nightmare amplified by zeros that should have guaranteed a different ending. Roberta Brooke Russell spent her childhood following her father across the globe. John Henry Russell Jr., a Marine Corps officer who would eventually become the 16th Commandant of the Marine Corps, moved his only daughter from Hawaii to China, the Dominican Republic to Haiti. This peripatetic upbringing left young Bobby both worldly and sheltered, a paradox that would shape her choices in love and fortune. At 17, in 1919, she married John Dryden Cuser, son of a wealthy New Jersey businessman and grandson of U.S. Senator John F. Dryden. What promised security became what Brooke later called the worst years of my life. Cuser drank heavily, committed adultery, and beat his young wife with disturbing regularity. When Brooke was 6 months pregnant with their only child, Anthony Dryden, Tony Cuser, her husband struck her during an argument and broke her jaw. She endured 11 years of this violence before filing for divorce in Reno, Nevada in 1930, escaping with her son and little else. Her second marriage in 1932 brought genuine happiness. Charles Buddy Marshall was a Wall Street broker who treated Brooke with tenderness she had never known. For 20 years she built a life editing at House and Garden magazine, developing the refined aesthetic sense that would later define her philanthropy. Young Tony, desperate to distance himself from his violent father, adopted his stepfather's surname at 18. Then in 1952, Buddy collapsed from a heart attack and died in front of Brooke at their Massachusetts home. Friends worried about poor little Brooke, now widowed and facing financial uncertainty at 48. Less than a year later, she married Vincent Astor, the temperamental heir to one of America's great fortunes. The circumstances were unusual. Vincent's second wife, Minnie, had orchestrated the match, refusing to divorce him until she found a suitable replacement. At a carefully arranged dinner party, Brooke sat across from Vincent, and within weeks they were engaged. Vincent Astor had inherited immense wealth but little happiness. His father, John Jacob Astor IV, perished on the Titanic in 1912 when Vincent was 20. The loss, combined with a cold upbringing, left him prone to what Brooke called profound sadness. She later confessed she had loved Buddy far more than Vincent, whom she addressed as Captain. Their marriage lasted 5.5 years before Vincent died in 1959. His will transformed Brooke's life completely. She received $2 million outright, about $18 million in today's currency, plus income from a trust valued between $60 and $65 million, roughly half his estate. More significantly, Vincent left her control of the Vincent Astor Foundation, dedicated to the alleviation of human misery. Foundation board members expected Brooke to serve ceremonially, signing checks while others did the actual work. They completely misjudged her. Over nearly 40 years, from 1959 to 1997, Brooke gave away approximately $200 million to New York institutions, equivalent to over $1.6 billion today. She revolutionized American philanthropy through personal involvement rather than distant generosity. Dressed in Chanel suits and white gloves, she visited every homeless shelter, housing project, and community centre requesting grants. "Money is like manure, it's not worth a thing unless it's spread around," she often said, quoting Thornton Wilder's play The Matchmaker. The Metropolitan Museum of Art received millions, including $6 million for the Astor Court, a Chinese garden courtyard. The New York Public Library got $10 million for renovations. Carnegie Hall, the Bronx Zoo, the Museum of Natural History, Central Park, all benefited from her methodical generosity. Former Mayor Abraham Beame declared that Astor had done more for New York City than any other one person. President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998, calling her America's Guardian Angel. By her 100th birthday in 2002, Brooke Astor reigned as the unquestioned Queen of New York. Her dinner parties gathered power brokers from politics, business and the arts, and she had become the city's most beloved philanthropist. Yet within her own family, a decades-old wound was festering, one that would soon erupt into a scandal that would horrify the world and destroy the woman who had given away hundreds of millions to help strangers. Anthony Dryden Marshall entered the world on May 30th, 1924, under circumstances that poisoned his relationship with his mother from the start. Brooke later implied in her autobiography that his conception occurred during a violent encounter with Cusa. His father had already broken his mother's jaw while she carried him. Brooke never really bonded with her son, creating a wound that never healed across 83 years. When she divorced Cusa and married Buddy Marshall, 8-year-old Tony was sent away to boarding schools, while his mother built a new life without him. Brooke chose her new husband over her son, a pattern she would repeat throughout Tony's childhood. Buddy Marshall never adopted Tony, never fully welcomed him into the family, leaving the boy feeling like a permanent outsider in his own home. When Brooke married Vincent Astor in 1953, the rejection intensified dramatically. Vincent despised Tony and Brooke shut him out of her life to satisfy her wealthy third husband. "He never accomplished anything," Brooke confided to friends about her only child, later admitting Tony had disappointed her so thoroughly that she decided against having more children. The relationship operated through what observers described as a tremendous push-pull. Brooke demanded Tony's presence while withholding the affection and approval he craved. He became known primarily as Brooke Astor's son, a shadow identity that defined his entire existence. Yet Tony built a distinguished career despite his mother's emotional abandonment. He served as a Marine in World War II, earning a Purple Heart after leading his platoon at Iwo Jima. He joined the CIA afterward, contributing to the development of the U-2 spy plane program. The State Department appointed him U.S. Ambassador to Madagascar from 1969 to 1971, then Trinidad and Tobago from 1972 to 1973, Kenya from 1973 to 1977, and the Seychelles from 1976 to 1977. He won a Tony Award as a Broadway producer and published books. By any reasonable standard, Tony Marshall had achieved considerable success, yet in his mother's eyes, he remained a failure. His personal life proved more troubled. 2 marriages ended in divorce before he married a third time in 1992 at age 68. This final marriage would have devastating consequences for his mother. Charlene Gilbert had been married to Paul Gilbert, the Episcopal minister at Brooke's century-old church in Northeast Harbor, Maine. She had lived modestly as a minister's wife for 2 decades, serving the wealthy summer residents who attended services, including the Astors. Then, in the late 1980s, Charlene began arriving at Brooke's main estate, Cove End, at 7 in the morning for walks with Tony. By 1989, she had left her minister husband for Tony Marshall, and they married in 1992, when Brooke was 90 years old and showing early signs of cognitive decline. Brooke Astor loathed her new daughter-in-law with startling intensity, calling Charlene that bitch and complaining constantly about her lack of refinement. Staff nicknamed Charlene Miss Piggy for what they perceived as greed and social climbing. Multiple witnesses later testified that Charlene wore the pants in the family. Tony made no decision without consulting her first. The marriage coincided with growing financial pressure on Tony, who, despite his mother's vast wealth, had received relatively little over the years, while watching her donate hundreds of millions to strangers. In the early 1980s, Brooke appointed Tony as her portfolio manager, paying him $450,000 annually, roughly $1,200,000 in today's dollars. The salary seemed generous until one considered the lifestyle Tony and Charlene desired: multiple homes, expensive tastes, and the constant comparison to his mother's legendary generosity toward everyone except her own son. In 2000, Brooke received a diagnosis that would change everything: Alzheimer's disease. Tony kept the diagnosis hidden, even as his mother's mental state deteriorated visibly over the following years. Friends noticed that by 2001 and 2002, Brooke repeated herself constantly, became confused about her location, and failed to recognize long-time acquaintances. One guest at a 1997 book party found the 94-year-old out on the sidewalk, dressed to the nines, with no idea where she was or what she was doing. As his mother's mind crumbled, Tony saw something his wife recognized immediately: an opportunity to finally claim what he believed he was owed. 2004, Brooke Astor's Alzheimer's disease had progressed until she could no longer recognize her own grandsons. When Philip Marshall visited his grandmother at her Park Avenue apartment in March 2004, she appeared very disoriented and terrified, failing to recognize Philip until he reassured her. "We're family, we love you." She squeezed his hand and relaxed, but the incident haunted him for months afterward. What Philip and others began discovering was far worse than cognitive decline alone. Brooke Astor, who had given away $200 million to help others, was living in conditions that shocked everyone who saw them. The 104-year-old philanthropist slept on a sofa reeking of dog urine. her nightgowns so torn and frayed that nurses had to turn them inside out to hide the worst damage. Her beloved dachshunds, Boise and Girlsy, whom she had cherished for years and once hosted elaborate parties for, were confined to a pantry and locked away from her. When the dogs were occasionally released, they defecated on priceless Aubusson carpets, while staff members were forbidden to properly maintain the apartment. Her diet consisted of pureed peas, carrots, and oatmeal, bland institutional food, bearing no resemblance to the gourmet meals she had enjoyed prepared by her French chef, whom Tony had fired to cut costs. Expensive face creams had been replaced with petroleum jelly, and Tony refused to buy her a new dress for her 104th birthday. When nurses requested $5 to $10 for non-skid socks to prevent her from slipping, Tony denied the request. The nurses purchased them with their own money. Tony had systematically stripped away every comfort and dignity from his mother's life, reducing her medications, limiting doctor visits, and ordering staff never to take her to an emergency room or call 911 without contacting him first. He refused to purchase a bed with rails, even though she had fallen multiple times. And the Park Avenue apartment, once the gleaming centre of New York society, had become cold, dimly lit, and dirty. Perhaps the cruelest theft involved Brooke's most cherished painting. In February 2002, Tony convinced his mother, already showing clear signs of dementia, to sell Childe Hassam's Flags, Fifth Avenue, an impressionist masterpiece depicting bustling New York street scenes that had hung above her library fireplace for 32 years. Brooke had purchased it in 1970 for $172,010, about $1,200,000 today. Tony told his mother she needed the money, that she could not afford new dresses until she sold the painting. A calculated deception, considering Brooke had more than $150 million in assets at the time, and an annual income of approximately $2 million from her trust. But with her Alzheimer's impaired judgment, she believed her son's lies. Tony sold the painting to Santa Fe art dealer Gerald Peters for $10 million, several million more than any Hassam had previously sold for at auction, and took a $2 million commission from the sale, roughly $6,700,000 in today's money. The dealer later resold it for between $20 and $25 million, while Brooke never saw a penny beyond losing her favourite artwork. The tax fraud surrounding the sale proved equally brazen. Tony's accountants listed the painting's original purchase price as $7,425,000 instead of $172,010, vastly inflating the cost basis and reducing capital gains taxes owed by approximately $1 million. Tony and Charlene also engineered the closure of Holly Hill, Brooke's beloved 64-acre Westchester County estate, with 24 rooms, 13 bedrooms, and luxurious gardens, where Brooke had expressly stated she wanted to spend her final days. In January 2005, Tony shut down the house, ostensibly to reduce expenses, and fired Brooke's loyal butler, Christopher Ely, when he complained about her deteriorating conditions. The gardens Brooke loved were ploughed under. Tony claimed the flowers caused him tearful memories of his mother in her prime. Longtime friends, Nancy Reagan, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, Annette de la Renta, found visiting increasingly difficult as Tony restricted access to his mother. Meanwhile, he looted millions beyond the painting commission and his inflated salary, using his mother's money to pay the captain of a $920,000 yacht he had purchased, investing in Broadway theatrical productions with her funds, maintaining his own properties using her accounts, and transferring $100,000 to Charlene's religious congregation. But Tony had underestimated his own son Philip, who was quietly documenting every abuse and preparing to do something that would tear the family apart forever. Philip Marshall faced an agonizing choice in 2006: expose his own father's abuse or watch his grandmother suffer until death. A professor of historic preservation at Roger Williams University in Rhode Island, Philip had maintained a close relationship with Brooke despite his father's coldness, and had witnessed the deteriorating conditions firsthand during regular visits. "If it was at the cost of anything I was to inherit, I just don't care," Philip later told the New York Post. On July 20th, 2006, he filed a guardianship petition in New York court seeking to remove Tony as Brooke's legal guardian, a petition containing serious and disturbing allegations that shocked New York society when it became public 6 days later. Philip detailed his father's pattern of neglect, the squalid living conditions, the financial exploitation, and the deliberate isolation of one of the city's most beloved figures. He rallied extraordinary support. Annette de la Renta, Brooke's closest friend, filed an affidavit supporting the guardianship change, while financier David Rockefeller and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger added their voices. The New York Daily News ran front-page headlines, "Disaster for Mrs. Astor," with details about the dog urine-soaked sofa, the torn nightgowns, the pureed peas, and the denied medications filling tabloid pages. A judge granted Philip's emergency request immediately, appointing Annette de la Renta as Brooke's temporary guardian and J.P. Morgan Chase Bank to manage her finances, stripping Tony of all authority over his mother. Brooke was briefly hospitalized, then moved to Holly Hill, which Philip and Mrs. de la Renta had reopened and fully staffed, spending her final year there, surrounded by beauty and genuine care, before dying on August 13, 2007, at age 105. Philip's rescue mission triggered a criminal investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and what prosecutors uncovered led to what they called Grand Theft Astor, a systematic scheme to defraud one of New York's most beloved figures. On October 8, 2009, after 5 months of testimony and 12 contentious days of jury deliberation, 85-year-old Anthony Marshall was convicted on 14 criminal counts, including first-degree grand larceny, conspiracy and scheming to defraud. His co-defendant, attorney Francis X. Morrissey Jr., was found guilty on all 6 counts against him, including forgery in the second degree. The trial featured testimony from Henry Kissinger, Barbara Walters, Annette de la Renta, David Rockefeller, and Vartan Gregorian. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. Between 2001 and 2007, while Brooke's Alzheimer's destroyed her capacity for informed decisions, Tony had given himself a 208% raise, increasing his annual compensation from roughly $450,000 to $2,300,000 to $2,500,000. He had worked with attorneys to add 3 codicils to Brooke's 2002 will, redirecting approximately $60 million from charities to his control. The third codicil became the centerpiece of the forgery charge against Morrissey. Handwriting expert Gus Lesnovich examined 240 known Brooke Astor signatures from 1953 to 2004, and the signature on the third codicil, dated March 3, 2004, stood out dramatically. "No doubt that it's not Brooke Astor's signature," Lesnovich concluded, noting it was written too smoothly for someone with advanced Alzheimer's, with letters connected in ways Brooke never connected them, bearing telltale signs of being traced over. Justice A. Kirkbartley Jr. sentenced both men to 1 to 3 years in prison on December 21, 2009, though Tony served only 8 weeks at Fishkill Correctional Facility before a parole board granted medical release on August 22, 2009-2013, citing his Parkinson's disease and congestive heart failure. He died on November 30, 2014, at age 90, never expressing genuine remorse. The estate settlement in March 2012 recognised Brooke's 2002 will as valid, rejecting all 3 codicils, and after paying a $12,300,000 fine, estate taxes, and more than $11,600,000 in legal fees, Tony's actual inheritance was reduced to less than $3 million. The remaining $100 million went to charities as Brooke had intended, approximately $20 million to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, $15 million to the New York Public Library, $30 million to create the Brooke Astor Fund for New York City education, and millions more to institutions ranging from the Brooklyn Museum to the Wildlife Conservation Society. Philip Marshall, who lost his $9 million inheritance when his father cut him from the will, never regretted his decision. leaving his university position to found Beyond Brook, a non-profit dedicated to elder justice advocacy. Brooke Astor's gravestone at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Westchester County bears the inscription she requested: "I had a wonderful life." Heartbreaking words from a woman whose final years were defined by isolation, degradation and betrayal at the hands of the son she bore 83 years earlier in a violent marriage, a son who never forgave her for choosing everyone else first and extracted his revenge when she was most vulnerable. In the 1920s, in the Emerald Highlands beneath the shadow of Mount Kenya, British colonialism carved an unlikely paradise from the wilderness. Here, amid acacia trees and golden savannas, European aristocrats created a realm where conventional morality faded like mist under the African sun. They called it Happy Valley, a name dripping with irony and gin-soaked promise. This wasn't merely a place, but a state of mind, where titled Europeans fleeing the constraints of post-war society established farms, built grand estates, and invented their own rules. By day, they played at being gentlemen farmers. By night, they surrendered to temptations that would have scandalized London drawing rooms. Into this intoxicating world stepped an American heiress whose beauty was matched only by her capacity for self-destruction. Today we share her tempestuous story as we describe the haunted heiress who loved and lost, Alice de Yornze. On a moonlit evening in Kenya's lush highlands during the 1930s, while war clouds loomed over Europe, the colonial elite gathered at Les Gazelles to celebrate the birthday of Alice de Yornze, American heiress, French countess, and undisputed queen of Africa's infamous Happy Valley set. Guests were greeted by the surreal sight of cheetahs lounging on velvet divans, their spotted coats catching firelight as servants glided past with silver trays brimming with champagne. Inside, Alice held court, a vision in satin and jewels, her dark curls framing what newspapers once dubbed the most beautiful face in America. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene with something between detachment and calculation. The grand salon shimmered like a jazz-age mirage, exotic animal trophies on the walls, rare European paintings adorning the hall, and vases spilling over with blooms from Alice's meticulously curated gardens. The gramophone piped in a hot jazz melody from Paris, blending with laughter, cigarette smoke, and murmurs of secret affairs unfolding behind colonial politesse. As dawn neared, the night reached its climax with the entrance of Jocelyn Hay, the Earl of Errol, a magnetic, reckless British aristocrat whose appearance sent a ripple through the atmosphere. Alice's famously poised demeanour faltered for just a moment. Their energy was volatile, thrilling. Whispers followed them. Alice's love was like a sickness, and Jocelyn liked watching her burn. Few noticed how her fingers trembled or how her gaze darted toward her handbag, where a pearl-handled pistol lay beside vials of morphine. These were her twin crutches, one for defense, one for escape. Behind the glittering facade, Alice was a storm contained in silk. She had already etched her legend into the scandal pages, the American beauty who had shot both her lover and herself at a Paris train station. Acquitted by a French court, she remained convicted in the eyes of society. Even in Africa, judgment followed. Les Gazelles was her castle and her prison, built not only to dazzle, but to shield her from the world's unforgiving gaze. As the party crescendoed, Alice stepped onto her terrace, the African dawn washing over Lake Naivasha in shades of crimson and gold. The colours mirrored the chaos in her soul, beautiful, violent, impossible to tame. Her guests danced and drank, unaware that their glamorous hostess stood at the brink. Beneath the diamonds and designer gowns was a woman unravelling, one who had never truly escaped the pain she carried across continents. That night at Les Gazelles wasn't merely a celebration. It was Alice's last great performance before the curtain began to fall. And to understand how she became this magnetic, tormented creature of desire and despair, we must go back to the steel palaces of Pittsburgh and a childhood gilded in sorrow. Alice Silverthorne entered the world in 1899, with steel in her blood and sadness in her bones. Born into America's industrial aristocracy, she belonged to a dynasty forged in furnaces. Her father, William Silverthorne, had amassed his fortune during the golden age of steel, building an empire that rivaled European nobility in both wealth and ambition. The Silverthorne homes in Pittsburgh and New York towered like testaments to capitalism's promise. Yet within those ornate walls lived a girl who once wrote, she felt like a ghost haunting rooms too grand for comfort. Privilege had gilded her cradle, but it could not soothe the ache of emotional absence that echoed through her childhood. From the start, Alice was a source of unease to her socially driven mother. She wasn't content to play the demure heiress. She questioned, defied, and resisted, a wild spark in a world that demanded polish. At 14, her debutante ball became an early act of rebellion when she shocked her guests by dancing too closely with a waiter and sipping champagne like a seasoned flapper. It wouldn't be the last time Alice would scandalise a roomful of expectations. By 18, her dark curls and haunting eyes had earned her the title of the most beautiful girl in America in the society pages. But Alice, ever dismissive of surface accolades, was unimpressed. "Beauty is boring," she once told a journalist. "It doesn't make you happy." She longed for something more than magazine covers and ballrooms, something real, dangerous, and alive. Europe, with its promise of freedom and decadence, beckoned. And when she met Frederic de Yornzay, a French count with a faded title and a thirst for new money, Alice saw a door opening. To her parents, the match was ideal, old-world prestige for new-world dollars. But to Alice, it was escape. At 21, she traded heiress for countess. Paris welcomed her with open arms and 1,000 temptations. She dove headfirst into the city's hedonistic afterglow, jazz clubs, cabarets, artists, opium, affairs. The Count quickly proved as faithless as he was charming, so Alice matched him, excess for excess, hurt for hurt. In private, she confessed her emptiness in letters to childhood friends. "I move through these glittering rooms like a phantom, becoming translucent from lack of love." Then came Raymond de Trafford, a British aristocrat with a sharp tongue and wounded heart. Their affair burned hotter than any before, a dangerous mirror reflecting Alice's rawest desires. Their passion would end famously in blood and scandal, but first it would carry her to the brink, the edge of violence, of self-destruction, and ultimately toward the wild lands of Africa, where exile might feel like freedom. The Gare du Nord railway station in Paris became the stage for Alice de Yornzay's most notorious performance in 1927, a moment of passion and violence that would forever alter the trajectory of her tumultuous life. Raymond de Trafford, the British aristocrat with whom Alice had been conducting a passionate affair, had chosen this public setting to inform her of his intention to honour his engagement to another woman. Without warning, Alice reached into her handbag and produced a small pistol, its pearl handle gleaming briefly before she fired 2 decisive shots, one into Raymond's chest and another into her own abdomen in a dramatic gesture of romantic despair. The fallen bodies of lover and beloved, surrounded by shocked Parisian commuters, created a tableau that epitomised the excess of the Jazz Age, a scene replicated in newspaper illustrations with headlines proclaiming, "American heiress shoots lover and self in fit of passion." Both Alice and Raymond survived their wounds, setting the stage for a sensational trial that transfixed Parisian society and transformed Alice from merely wealthy socialite to legendary femme fatale. Her defence attorney successfully argued that Alice had been in the grip of crime passionnel, a temporary madness induced by love, leading to her acquittal and cementing her reputation as a woman of ungovernable passions. Despite escaping legal punishment, Alice found herself exiled from the very society that had once embraced her. Former friends avoided her, invitations ceased arriving, and her husband, Frederic, filed for divorce. With the ruins of her Parisian life smouldering around her, Alice looked to the one place that might welcome a woman of her particular reputation, Kenya's Happy Valley, a remote colonial outpost where European aristocrats had established a libertine society. In 1929, as America's stock market collapsed, Alice's inheritance remained secure, allowing her to purchase Les Gazelles, an elegant estate on Lake Naivasha, where she created a sanctuary for her wounded spirit. Her arrival in Kenya was like the introduction of an exotic species into a delicate ecosystem. She brought not only her wealth and beauty, but also a capacity for emotion that frightened and fascinated the expatriate community. The Happy Valley set lived by their own moral code. Partner swapping, drug use, and excessive drinking were commonplace activities among the bored colonial elite. Yet even in this permissive atmosphere, Alice stood apart, keeping cheetahs and monkeys as pets, decorating her home with a startling mixture of African artifacts and European luxury, and pursuing her desires with frightening intensity. It was in this setting that Alice encountered Jocelyn Hay, Earl of Errol, a handsome, titled British aristocrat whose charm was matched only by his cruelty, igniting a love affair that would consume what remained of Alice's fragile emotional stability. As their relationship intensified, their public displays became legendary. Racing cars across the savannah, exchanging passionate insults at dinner parties, and according to local gossip, once riding horses naked through the African bush. Behind the spectacular performances lay a dark truth. Jocelyn, like Raymond before him, could not or would not reciprocate the totality of Alice's love, his marriage creating a barrier that even Alice's wealth and determination could not overcome. Thus, the stage was set for the next act in Alice's tragic life, a drama of obsession, betrayal, and ultimately murder that would forever link her name with the blood-soaked secrets of Happy Valley. The discovery of Jocelyn Hay's body in his Buick on January 24, 1941, sent shockwaves through Kenya's colonial society. The Earl of Errol, shot through the head, transformed instantly from rakish aristocrat to murder victim. News of the killing spread through Happy Valley with the speed of wildfire. Telephones rang in isolated farmhouses, servants whispered in kitchen quarters, and at Les Gazelles, Alice de Yonze received the information with a curious stillness. Within hours, police investigators arrived at Alice's door, their questions revealing the connection that had placed her high on their list of suspects. Her notorious marksmanship, her turbulent history with Jocelyn, and her established capacity for violence. When questioned about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Alice reportedly offered a slight, enigmatic smile before providing a detailed alibi, her cool demeanour striking the officers as either innocence or practiced performance. The investigation uncovered a web of motives and suspects. Jocelyn's cuckolded husband, Sir Jock Delves Broughton, various jealous lovers, political enemies, and even theories involving wartime espionage all competed with Alice in the public imagination. As the case progressed, without resolution, Alice's behaviour grew increasingly erratic. She secluded herself at Les Gazelles, surrounded by exotic pets, and attended by concerned servants who reported her increasing consumption of alcohol and morphine. Her home, once the crown jewel of Happy Valley society, fell into disrepair. Gardens overgrew their boundaries, rooms gathered dust, and Alice herself appeared rarely, a diminished version of the vibrant hostess she had once been. The morphine that had once been an occasional escape became her constant companion, dulling not only physical pain, but the sharper agonies of love and loss that had pursued her across continents. In 1942, Alice filled her bathtub with water and orchid petals, slit her wrists with a silver letter opener, and waited for darkness, only to be discovered and saved by a loyal servant. The failed suicide attempt added another layer to her legend. The woman who had once shot her lover and herself now seemed determined to write her own final chapter, though the pen kept slipping from her grasp. A second attempt followed months later when Alice consumed a dangerous quantity of sleeping pills. Again thwarted by the intervention of household staff, who monitored their increasingly unpredictable mistress. As World War II raged, Happy Valley's isolation began to crack. The war effort claimed many young men. Luxury goods became scarce, and the carefree lifestyle that had defined the community grew difficult to maintain. Alice, now in her 40s, showed the visible effects of her inner turmoil. Her once celebrated beauty faded, her health compromised, her fortune dwindling through neglect and excessive generosity. Her social circle contracted as death, war, and financial reality claimed former friends. The grand parties became distant memories, and Alice spent more time with her dogs than in human company. By the late 1940s, Alice had become almost a ghost, appearing occasionally in Nairobi shops, purchasing extravagant items she didn't need, her once commanding presence reduced to the shuffling remains of someone who had once been magnificent. In early 1949, Alice wrote a final letter to her estranged daughter, Paula. "I've loved too much, too wrongly. Now there's nothing left but silence." Words that served as both explanation and epitaph for a life consumed by passions too intense to sustain. On a luminous September morning in 1949, Alice de Jonze rose from her bed for the last time. She chose a favourite dress from what remained of her once lavish wardrobe, stepped quietly into the garden at Les Gazelles, and carried with her a small, pearl-handled pistol, the same weapon that had once brought infamy and survival in a Paris train station. This time she would not miss. There was no servant to intervene, no frantic doctor to undo the damage, no journalist to splash headlines across Europe. Only the stillness of Kenya's Rift Valley bore witness to her final act. She was found hours later by her gardener, lying among her orchids, blood soaking the earth she had so often tended with care. Word of Alice's suicide rippled through what remained of the Happy Valley community. Telephones buzzed, cablegrams sped across oceans, and in grand houses left half empty, glasses were raised in quiet mourning. An era had come to a definitive and tragic close. Her funeral was a muted affair. The glittering crowd that had once filled her home had long since vanished, scattered by war, bankruptcy, scandal, or the slow erosion of colonial life. Alice was buried near her estate, her grave marked by a modest stone, etched only with her name and dates. Some say a hand, whose no one knows, scratched into the soil nearby. She loved, she lost, she never apologized. Les Gazelles, without its mistress, began to decay. The cheetahs were sent to zoos. The monkeys disappeared. The house, once filled with priceless objects and uncontainable emotion, stood silent as vines and grasses crept over its stone walls. The African wilderness reclaimed what had never truly belonged to the colonists. Over time, Alice's life became the stuff of legend. Writers romanticized her in books, dubbing her the tragic heiress, the woman who loved with bullets, or simply the most dangerous woman in Africa. Her daughter Paula, who had spent much of her life far from Alice's storm, rarely spoke of her. When asked, she said only, "My mother was like a hurricane. She left ruins, but you couldn't look away." Kenya too changed. Colonialism crumbled, independence loomed, and the decadent playground of European aristocrats faded into a nation seeking its own voice. Visitors who search for Les Gazelles now find only stone foundations, a few black and white photographs in local archives, and stories told by tour guides at dusk. And still, they say, Alice lingers, seen in flashes along Lake Naivasha's shore, pistol in hand, searching for what eluded her in life: love, peace, or maybe just a moment of clarity. Her tragedy wasn't merely how she died, but how she lived, fiercely, restlessly, and always just beyond the reach of happiness. The most dangerous place for a beautiful woman in Gilded Age America wasn't a dark alley or a rough neighborhood. It was a yacht party filled with wealthy gentlemen competing for her attention. High society gatherings might have featured crystal champagne flutes and string quartets, but they operated by rules more ruthless than any criminal underworld. When aristocratic men discovered they couldn't purchase the one thing they truly wanted, Their response often made street thugs look positively civilized by comparison. The combination of unlimited resources, scientific knowledge, and wounded pride created a toxic mixture that could destroy lives with surgical precision. One woman learned that choosing love over money in these circles doesn't just mean giving up luxury. It means becoming the unwitting centre of a revenge plot, so elaborate it would have impressed medieval poisoners. Her romantic decisions would ultimately expose how thin the veneer of civilization becomes when privilege meets rejection. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, I'll take you through a love story that became a masterclass in how wealth and jealousy can turn deadly. On a sun-drenched afternoon in 1897, aboard the luxurious yacht Monhegan, cruising the pristine waters off Maine's coast, a chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events culminating in double murder and one of America's most notorious criminal trials. Blanche Chesbrough, an enchanting, aspiring opera singer from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, possessed the rare combination of breathtaking beauty and genuine musical talent that made her the centre of attention wherever New York's social elite gathered. Born around 1874 to James Francis Chesbrough and Harriet Newell Crumb, she had arrived in Manhattan with dreams of operatic stardom, performing with the Musical Arts Society at the prestigious Carnegie Hall despite her family's modest financial circumstances. Though contemporary critics suggested her vocal abilities were somewhat limited, her ethereal presence and captivating stage manner had already begun opening doors among the city's cultural patrons who appreciated both her artistic aspirations and her striking appearance. At that fateful Maine yachting party, she met Roland Burnham Molyneux, heir to one of Brooklyn's most distinguished families and son of Civil War General Edward Leslie Molyneux, whose military service had elevated the family to prominence within New York's established society. Roland, born in 1866, represented everything that Gilded Age America celebrated: wealth, breeding, education, and social connections that opened every door in the city's most exclusive circles. His residence at the family's fashionable Fort Greene address at 117 Fort Greene Place reflected their status among Brooklyn's aristocratic families, while his membership in Manhattan's prestigious Knickerbocker Athletic Club provided entree to the city's most influential gentlemen. Working as a chemist at his father's successful paint company, F.W. DeVoe and C.T. Reynolds, Roland possessed specialized knowledge of exotic chemicals and rare compounds used in manufacturing processes, expertise that would later prove devastatingly significant. His access to dangerous substances like cyanide of mercury, routinely employed in paint production, distinguished him from typical wealthy young men who dabbled in business without acquiring technical skills. Roland's lifestyle epitomized turn-of-the-century privilege: summers yachting in Bar Harbor, winters attending exclusive social functions, and year-round participation in the rarefied world of Manhattan's elite clubs and societies. When he introduced Blanche to his close friend Henry Crossman Barnett at various Knickerbocker Club gatherings, Roland inadvertently orchestrated what would become his own romantic undoing. Barnett, a 32-year-old stockbroker with offices at 19 Broad Street, possessed the kind of charm and worldly sophistication that immediately captivated the beautiful singer. Described as having brown hair, blue eyes, and a neatly trimmed moustache complementing what observers delicately termed a decided paunch, Barnett had joined the athletic club hoping to improve his physical condition, but instead discovered something infinitely more compelling. The attraction between Blanche and Henry was instantaneous and overwhelming, transforming Roland's trusted friend into his most dangerous rival. Blanche would later describe Henry's influence over her as irresistible, recalling how he had swept me off my feet from their very first meeting. Their relationship quickly deepened beyond mere flirtation, becoming an intimate connection that would ultimately seal Henry's fate while binding Blanche to a nightmare from which she would struggle to escape. October 1898 brought a pivotal moment that would transform romantic disappointment into murderous obsession when Roland Molyneux, confident in his wealth and social position, formally proposed marriage to Blanche Chesbro. His proposal represented more than romantic desire. It embodied the entitled expectation of a man accustomed to acquiring whatever he coveted through the simple application of privilege and financial resources. Roland's shock was profound when Blanche rejected his offer with devastating directness, declaring without equivocation that her heart belonged entirely to Henry Barnet. For a man raised to believe that his aristocratic heritage and substantial fortune guaranteed success in all endeavours, this rejection struck at the very foundation of his identity and self-worth. The humiliation festered within Roland's mind, transforming wounded pride into something far more sinister as he contemplated the unthinkable reality that his closest friend had succeeded where he had failed. Late in October 1898, Henry Barnet received what appeared to be a routine promotional sample at his Knickerbocker Athletic Club address. A small tin of Kutnau's improved effervescent powder, marketed as a harmless digestive remedy. Such unsolicited samples were commonplace among pharmaceutical companies seeking to introduce their products to potential customers, making the package seem entirely unremarkable. On October 28th, Henry consumed a dose of the powder, expecting nothing more than possible relief from digestive discomfort that might assist his ongoing efforts to reduce his weight. Instead of improvement, he experienced the onset of violent illness that would persist with increasing severity until his death on November 10th, 1898, just 13 days after taking the fatal dose. During his agonizing final weeks, Henry mentioned to his attending physician, Dr. Henry Beeman Douglas, the mysterious powder he had received, providing a crucial detail that would later expose the murder plot. Dr. Douglas initially diagnosed the death as cardiac asthenia induced by diphtheric poisoning, a misattribution that allowed the crime to remain undetected for months. The symptoms of mercury poisoning closely resembled diphtheria in certain stages, creating plausible medical cover for what was actually deliberate assassination. However, Dr. Douglas had retained the powder container, and subsequent chemical analysis revealed the presence of cyanide of mercury, a rare poison accessible to someone with Roland's specialized knowledge of industrial chemicals. When authorities later exhumed Henry's body on February 28, 1899, tissue analysis confirmed the presence of the deadly compound, establishing definitive proof of murder. Remarkably, just 8 days after Henry's death, Roland again proposed to Blanche, perhaps calculating that her romantic dreams now necessarily involved him rather than her deceased lover. Whether motivated by grief, shock, or pragmatic recognition that her artistic ambitions required financial backing, Blanche accepted his second proposal. Their wedding took place on November 29, 1898, a mere 19 days after Henry's funeral, timing that would later appear damning to investigators and prosecutors. The unseemly haste suggested to authorities that Roland had eliminated his romantic rival specifically to clear his path to Blanche's hand, transforming murder into a calculated courtship strategy. Blanche's transformation from aspiring opera singer to Mrs. Roland Molyneux elevated her social status dramatically, but it also made her an unwitting participant in what prosecutors would characterize as premeditated murder. Their marriage celebration marked not a romantic triumph, but the successful conclusion of Roland's first act of revenge, setting the stage for even deadlier schemes targeting those who had crossed his path. While Roland's marriage to Blanche provided the romantic satisfaction he had sought through murder, his social relationships continued deteriorating due to his consuming hatred for Harry Seymour Cornish, athletic director of the Knickerbocker Club. Their antagonism had grown so intense that Roland had resigned his membership in 1897 when fellow members refused to dismiss Cornish, whom he publicly denounced as fundamentally unsuitable for his position. Roland's objections seemed rooted in class prejudice, viewing Cornish as representing unwelcome working-class intrusion into spaces traditionally reserved for society's elite. The holiday season of 1898 would provide Roland with an opportunity to settle this festering grievance through methods he had already proven devastatingly effective. On December 23rd, Harry Cornish received what appeared to be an elegant Christmas gift at the Knickerbocker Athletic Club, a package that would soon demonstrate Rowland's escalating boldness in pursuing his vendettas. The beautifully presented box from Tiffany & Company contained a silver toothpick holder accompanied by a bottle labelled Emerson's Bromo Seltzer, seemingly an authentic headache remedy. Unknown to Cornish, sophisticated chemical analysis would later reveal that the bottle contained legitimate bromo seltzer powder, carefully mixed with lethal quantities of cyanide of mercury. This deadly preparation required both access to rare poisons and sufficient chemical knowledge to create an undetectable mixture, capabilities that Rowland's professional background provided in abundance. Cornish brought the gift home to his shared lodgings with 62-year-old Catherine Adams, his distant cousin, and her daughter Florence, establishing an innocent household as the setting for Rowland's next murderous scheme. The morning of December 28th brought Catherine Adams a severe headache that would tragically become her final earthly suffering. When Florence suggested using the bromo seltzer that Cornish had received as a gift, Catherine gratefully accepted what appeared to be standard household medicine. Cornish prepared the fatal dose by mixing a heaping teaspoonful of the powder with water, creating the concoction that would end an innocent woman's life within minutes of consumption. Catherine drank the entire mixture, trusting completely in what seemed like ordinary headache relief. Almost immediately she began experiencing violent reactions that brought screams, attracting the entire household, as the poison began its deadly work. The mixture reportedly emitted an almond-like odour characteristic of cyanide poisoning, though this warning sign went unrecognised by those desperately trying to help her. Medical assistance arrived quickly, but Catherine Adams died shortly after the doctor's arrival, becoming an unintended victim of Rowland's murderous campaign against Harry Cornish. Cornish himself tasted the mixture and fell ill, but prompt medical intervention by Dr. Hitchcock, who recognised cyanide poisoning symptoms, saved his life through rapid administration of antidotes. The cruel irony was unmistakable. Rowland had succeeded in committing murder, but had killed an innocent elderly woman rather than his intended target. This case of mistaken victimhood would ultimately strengthen the prosecution's case by demonstrating Rowland's callous disregard for innocent life in pursuing his personal vendettas. The Christmas gift had delivered death instead of holiday cheer, transforming what should have been a season of celebration into a tragedy that would soon expose Rowland's murderous obsessions to the full scrutiny of American justice. Catherine Adams's senseless death marked the moment when Rowland's private grievances became public crimes that would ultimately destroy his carefully constructed life of privilege and respectability. Captain McCluskey assumed command of the investigation on December 29, 1898, immediately focusing on Harry Cornish as the intended victim and seeking suspects with both motive and means for such sophisticated poisoning. Investigators quickly identified Roland Molyneux as their prime suspect based on compelling circumstantial evidence. His public feud with Cornish, his expert knowledge of exotic chemicals, his employment at a facility using cyanide of mercury, and his customer account at Tiffany where the silver toothpick holder originated. The prosecution constructed their case around cutting-edge handwriting analysis, summoning over a dozen expert witnesses to testify that identical penmanship appeared on address labels for both the cut-now powder sent to Barnett and the bromo seltzer package delivered to Cornish. This forensic evidence, though later questioned for reliability, represented the most advanced investigative techniques available and formed the centerpiece of what prosecutors believed was an unassailable case. Rowland's arrest on February 27, 1899, followed a coroner's inquest into Catherine Adams's death that had successfully connected her murder to Henry Barnett's earlier poisoning, revealing a pattern of calculated killing. The subsequent trial, beginning in November 1899 and concluding in February 1900, became the longest and most expensive criminal proceeding in New York history, captivating national attention. Media coverage reached unprecedented levels as newspapers engaged in fierce competition for the most sensational reporting, with the New York World and New York Journal leading the charge in what became known as yellow journalism. Prosecutor James W. Osborne built his strategy around circumstantial evidence and scientific testimony, controversially introducing details about Henry Barnett's death to establish Rowland's pattern of behaviour and demonstrate clear motive. The defence team, led by George Gordon Battle and Bartow Weeks, employed the startling strategy of presenting no witnesses or evidence, declaring simply that the prosecution has failed to establish its charge. This calculated gamble aimed to highlight weaknesses in the circumstantial case while avoiding any testimony that might provide additional ammunition for prosecutors. On February 10, 1900, the jury convicted Rowland of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death and making him one of Sing Sing's most notorious death row inmates. While awaiting execution, Rowland authored The Room with the Little Door, a haunting memoir of death row existence that criticised the criminal justice system while revealing unexpected depth and humanity. His literary efforts demonstrated intellectual capabilities that contradicted public perceptions of him as merely a pampered aristocrat, showing genuine empathy for fellow condemned prisoners from vastly different social backgrounds. On October 15, 1901, the New York Court of Appeals delivered a landmark reversal that would reshape American criminal law for generations. The appellate court ruled that introducing evidence about Henry Barnett's death violated fundamental principles of presumed innocence, since Rowland had never been formally charged with that crime. This decision established the Molyneux rule, strengthening defendants' rights by prohibiting prosecutors from introducing evidence of uncharged crimes to support their cases. Rowland's second trial began on October 13, 1902, with the prosecution significantly weakened by the exclusion of prejudicial evidence about Barnett's murder. After deliberating for merely 13 minutes, the jury acquitted Rowland on November 11, 1902, suggesting that circumstantial evidence alone was insufficient to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The swift acquittal demonstrated how the appellate court's decision had fundamentally altered the case's dynamics, transforming what seemed like certain conviction into rapid exoneration. One week after Rowland's acquittal, Blanche filed for divorce in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on November 18, 1902, citing mental cruelty as grounds for dissolving their scandal-scarred marriage. Her timing indicated careful planning, waiting until legal proceedings concluded before taking action that might have complicated Rowland's defense or forced her testimony against him. The divorce proceedings in September 1903 officially ended a union that had begun with murder and been sustained through years of imprisonment, trials, and public humiliation. Within 2 months of gaining her freedom, Blanche married Wallace D. Scott, the attorney who had represented her in the divorce, choosing both practical security and genuine affection over her traumatic past. Scott offered respectability and stability that her notorious first marriage had obliterated, providing sanctuary from the relentless publicity that had transformed her from unknown singer into America's most talked-about woman. Blanche attempted returning to entertainment in 1905, planning a vaudeville career under the name Blanche Chesebro Molyneux. But Rowland's legal threats over unauthorized use of his surname forced abandonment of her theatrical dreams. This final cruel irony demonstrated how their connection continued haunting her even after divorce, effectively destroying her last hope of reclaiming the artistic career that had originally brought her to New York. Following this setback, Blanche deliberately retreated from public attention, living quietly until her death in 1954 at age 80. Her conscious withdrawal from society reflected determination to escape the notoriety that had made her a household name throughout America during the early 1900s. Rowland attempted rebuilding his shattered life, marrying Margaret Connell in a New York courthouse ceremony on November 7, 1913. But years of imprisonment and scandal had severely damaged his mental stability. He continued writing after his release, publishing short stories in major newspapers and crafting a play titled The Man Inside, based on his prison experiences. However, the psychological strain of attempting to stage his theatrical work overwhelmed his already fragile mental condition. On September 7, 1914, Roland was committed to an asylum following a series of devastating mental breakdowns that rendered him incapable of caring for himself. Medical authorities diagnosed his condition as paresis, a form of neurosyphilis, causing progressive mental deterioration often associated with the dissolute lifestyle he had pursued in his youth. Roland died in institutional care on November 2, 1917, at age 51, his brilliant mind destroyed by disease that had slowly consumed his cognitive abilities. The Molyneux case established enduring legal precedents still cited in modern criminal trials, including recent high-profile cases involving similar issues of prejudicial evidence. For American society, the trial represented a watershed moment, demonstrating that wealth and privilege could not ultimately shield individuals from justice when their crimes shocked the public conscience. Blanche's story serves as a haunting reminder of how romantic choices can entangle innocent people in webs of violence beyond their control or comprehension. Her 50-year retreat from public life following the trials suggests the profound psychological scars left by her unwitting participation in one of America's most sensational criminal cases. The tragedy illustrates how quickly promising lives can be destroyed when love becomes tangled with jealousy, privilege, and the deadly capabilities of those who refuse to accept rejection.